Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. We'll be starting in just about a minute or so as we allow some other folks to get connected, and we're not quite at the top of the hour, so we'll just sit tight and we'll get started very soon. Thanks for joining. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I've got top of the hour and we've got a lot of information to share, so we're going to start on time. I know there are a lot of other people that are still in the process of joining. This seemed to be an especially popular topic. We have a lot of people who are going to be part of this session. So welcome to all of you who have joined already. We appreciate your interest in this information. We're excited to share it with you. My name is Anthony Adorno. I'm with DeGarmo. I'm joined by my colleague, Chad Carlisle, who many of you know through your training interactions, and likewise with him. I'm joined by two panelists as well, who I'll be introducing momentarily. For those of you who are new today, who haven't been part of a forum before, these are bi-monthly sessions that DeGarmo hosts on a variety of different topics that you all share with us as part of the post-session survey and evaluation. And so this was a topic that came up that we found particularly interesting, and based on the registrations, I think we were correct. So the concept of these forums, it's an opportunity for you all to learn from each other. We're creating an opportunity for everyone in the industry to learn from each other, to learn their best practices, their tips, their strategies, as it relates to your roles as FSCs. So again, this is a bi-monthly event. We do our best to identify and promote the sessions in enough time for you all to plan around them and be able to attend. It's also an opportunity for you all to meet each other virtually and to start networking, which we understand has been a pretty popular outcome of this event as well. So kind of the cadence for today is I'm going to introduce our panelists in a few minutes. I'm going to do a very short, what we call kind of a micro training on this topic, and then we're going to transition to some Q&A with the panelists themselves. You all will have an opportunity to engage with the panelists during this session at the end. We'll be fielding questions that you all submit. I'll encourage you to do that in real time, so don't just wait to the end. Chad's going to be behind the scenes, fielding those questions. Those that we think are going to be best for the entire group are the things that we'll tee up to our panelists and get their opinions on. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our two panelists. So I'm going to introduce one of the panelists, and the other panelist is going to introduce himself. So first, I'd like to welcome Sarah Brown. Sarah's with Aurora. She's a lifelong Arkansan. Graduated from the University of Arkansas in 2013 with a bachelor's degree in social work. With a diverse background in hospital and patient care settings, Sarah has extensive experience in case management, hospital liaison roles, and hospice support. Her compassionate approach and dedication to patient and family welfare have been instrumental in her career. And since August 2022, Sarah has been a valued member of the Aurora team, where she continues to make a positive impact on the families she serves. Typically I'll read the intros of each of the panelists just so that you have an understanding of their path to the FSC role, kind of what got them to where they are today. And in meeting with each of our panelists independently leading up to this session, Sean shared a personal story that he said he would be welcome to share as part of his introduction to today. So Sean If you don't mind, can you introduce yourself and your path to the FSC role today?
Yes, so good morning. My name is Sean Cervone. I'm a family services coordinator with the Legacy of Life Hawaii. I was, oh, sorry, somebody popped up. Prior to this role, well, back in 2019, I really didn't have much knowledge of the field of organ donation. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I studied animal behavior. I worked with animal behavior after graduation, and um, in 2019, my mother took her life via hanging. So for myself and my family, it was the worst case scenario that we could ever imagine. We were informed in the hospital that our mother was a registered organ donor, and she ultimately saved the lives of 3 people and enhanced the lives of many others through tissue. However, at the time when we were in the hospital, my sister at the time was 19 years old, was extremely devastated by our situation, and the support that we received from the OPO, which is New Jersey Sharing Network at the time, was paramount, not just only in changing the ending of the story for us while we were in the hospital, but also being able to kind of elongate her legacy. We do have contact with one of the recipients, which is extremely healing and beneficial. So I do have a little bit of a unique way of coming into this role, but I did do 3 years as a hospital services coordinator. I was a hospital liaison for a level 1 trauma center in New Jersey. And then 2 years ago, I moved to Hawaii, where I am now a family services coordinator here.
Welcome, Sean. Thank you for sharing. And I wanted to start today by doing a little micro session. I'm going to share my screen. So there are a number of folks who haven't been part of the training sessions that Chad leads prior to attending today's session. And this is just something that's kind of some baseline information that I thought might be helpful to make sure that we're all aligned on what today's topic is all about and the type of information that our panelists are going to be prepared to share. And so, the concept of today is all about what we call code switching. And really what code switching represents is this behavioral variability that we have to kind of adapt our unique interpersonal style or approach to the demands of a particular situation. And those might be driven by a number of different factors, including, cultural norms or, different circumstances that may present themselves that are more extreme, and you'll hear some of those today during the panelists' conversation. And so it's this ability to kind of adapt how we manage those conversations more fluidly and dynamically. That really is what referred to as code switching. And it's really a skill. It's something that can be developed over time with practice and awareness. As part of our research that kind of preempted all of the forums that we're hosting today, one of the things that we discovered is of the 400 people that provided some information to us as part of our survey, more than 50 of them said that they manage family conversations the same way, regardless of the circumstances. So they have their set approach, and they use that approach every single time, regardless of the dynamics of the situation, which we found interesting. 85% of you at some level vary how you manage family conversations. And so for that smaller percentage of people, this is a skill that can be learned to improve how those conversations are managed over time. Those relate to ultimately how you communicate with one another, your ability to maybe collaborate with hospital staff to build relationships, and ultimately have a positive impact on your role as an FSC in providing excellent support to families while also trying to optimize donation authorization rates. Part of really what kind of leads into this whole notion of behavioral variability and code switching is self-awareness and the things that are your default approaches in how you manage situations. And those people who are more self-aware of their behavioral tendencies, who understand how they're likely to react, what their unique strengths and opportunities are going to be better equipped to understand how to change those based on the dynamics of the situation. So again, this isn't something that comes particularly easily for everybody. It certainly is much more natural for some of us than for others, but it is something that can be improved over time based on self-awareness and some practice. So, ultimately what we're hoping to illustrate for you today is how the unique context that you find yourself in, those unique situational demands may require a different approach from an interpersonal or work style perspective in order to manage that conversation as effectively as you can. And so that may relate to how you communicate with the family members, how you behave. We've talked about mirroring in the past, mirroring the family's nonverbals, their verbals, and doing so in a way that is really authentic. And I think that's one of the themes that's going to emerge out of today's conversation, is being able to be situationally flexible and also be especially authentic in doing so. So again, I think our panelists have a lot of good information to share. I'm excited to hear from them. And I'll remind everybody, again, use the Q&A dialogue box along the way. Present any questions that you think might be good for the group. And my job as the moderator will be to try to make sure we leave enough time to field all those questions at the end. So without further ado, we are going to transition. I've got a few questions that I'm going to present to our panelists. I'm going to start with you, Sarah. So just be sure to unmute. And so the first question that I have, and I read these just to make sure that I don't mess them up. I apologize for that. But can you discuss a time when you had to step out of your comfort zone to engage in a particularly challenging family conversation? And what did you learn from that experience?
So one experience that came into my mind was it can be sometimes especially difficult for me when somebody is a registered donor and a family may have some reservations about that. And in that sense, I have to use more of an influential style when I'm talking to a family rather than something that I'm more comfortable with. For example, there was a registered donor. I was speaking with her husband and her daughter, informing them of the patient's wish to be an organ donor. The husband became upset. He said that that's not something that she would want to do. He was very adamant about that. I had to step out of my comfort zone in that instance and had to say, well, look here, I'm showing you this paper with her name on it and her date of birth and her address that says this is what she wanted to do. He still was not convinced that this is something that the patient would want to do. So I even got to the point where I said, well, why don't you pull out her driver's license? Let's look at her driver's license and see what it says on that. He pulls out her driver's license and he says, and it shows on there that she wants to be an organ donor. So, again, I had to step out of my comfort zone and explore the no of why he was saying she didn't want to be an organ donor when she clearly stated it on her driver's license. And so, again, in the end, after some time and some time to process the information, he became way more accepting of the situation. She ended up being an organ donor, and he was very thankful for the opportunity to do what she wanted to do. It just took, in my style, in that certain situation, I had to be more influential with that particular family member in that instance.
So you're saying that influence and using or leveraging influence behaviors isn't necessarily something that you would consider to be a personal strength, and that's what brought you outside of your comfort zone?
Oh, for sure. That is something that I do. I do like to use influence, but it's not something that I'm super comfortable with. And I know that. And so it's something that I have to work on a daily basis when I'm interacting with families.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how that would be an especially challenging situation, trying to convince a spouse that you know better than they do about what their significant other's wishes might be. And that might be something that um, a lot of people might just accept as part of that conversation and might not necessarily explore those denial reasons even further. So when you're pushing yourself, how are you getting yourself to think about being influential? Is it something that you think about, or is it just something that you know you have to do in order to try to get to authorization, or what's your kind of thought process there?
I really take, and just like you were talking about in the intro, I really take every conversation so different. I have no script. I have no certain way that I do every conversation. And immediately when that husband had immediate pushback, I just knew that I was going to have to take a different approach with him and be almost a little bit more stern of, listen, this is, this is what she wanted to do, and had to show him physical visual proof of what she wanted, and had to explore, why is it that why are you saying that she wouldn't want to? What makes you think that she wouldn't want to? And ultimately, he couldn't come up with an answer as to why she couldn't do that. And I think that really helped him also understand, where I was coming from, and having to show him, like, just because you're saying this doesn't mean that that's what your wife wanted. And it is uncomfortable having to be, hey, I know better than you on when it comes to your spouse.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I could understand that. Sean, uh, what about you? So can you talk about a time where you had to step outside of your comfort zone and manage a challenging conversation with a family?
Yes. So for me, growing up, religion was never really a part of my life. And stepping into this role, we quickly learn how relevant and important all the different religions and cultures are to different families. So one of the instances that I can think of is I was about to approach a Muslim family, um, and I had known that statistically, especially at this hospital, they were not Muslim faith individuals were not very supportive of donation for whichever reason. So I made sure that prior to going into this conversation with the family, I did as much research as I could about death and dying, for people of the Muslim faith, for organ donation conversations within the Muslim faith. And upon initial conversation, the family had stated that they were making all the decisions with the help of their imam. And I explained that knowing that I was going to have this conversation with them today, I did as much research about their religion, and found out as much as I could. And I asked them if it would be okay if I shared with them what I had learned. Um, they agreed to have this conversation with me. They asked if their imam could be part of it, which I obviously facilitated. And ultimately, we had a very an amazing conversation. I got to learn a little bit. They were actually very, I don't want to say impressed, but they were grateful that I took the time to research their religion and look into it, knowing that I was having that conversation. I think being open with them about that was very helpful as well. I didn't go in pretending to be an expert on their religion, but I did let them know that I researched it and I would like to have a conversation with them. Ultimately, they did consent to donation. And something that I learned from that experience is that being honest and genuine and authentic is universally appreciated, regardless of race and religion and culture. And you don't have to be an expert in everything, but being open to listening and learning and growing from these uncomfortable situations helped me to grow as a person and then provide even more support for donor families.
Mhm. And has that experience put you in a position to be more confident or effective in managing conversations that were similar to that after the fact, or was that kind of a one-off situation that you had to manage?
Ultimately, I don't think that I have any sort of a confidence problem or anything, as far as I don't typically get nervous. Just like Sarah, there's no script for me. The most thing I can do is learn as much about that family and as much about the course that brought them there prior to the conversation. That's really where I focus my energy, with talking with the healthcare team and getting everything that they have gotten from that family and speaking with them. But I would say that, especially living here, with the different cultures, how much difference there are here, that approach to researching and doing as much into their religion or cultures that I can prior has definitely helped me. It's something that I continue to do here. Thankfully, at the OPO that I work for, I have a lot of amazing people that have a lot of great knowledge that I can bounce ideas off of. But yeah, I would say definitely that has helped me. It gives me confidence knowing that, if it's something that I don't know about or I'm unfamiliar with, if I do some research and I learn and I'm open to listening to the family and what their views and how they are, I think that our conversation is always, a lot easier to happen in that manner.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, Sean, I'll start with you with this one. We'll just change it up a little bit. How do you navigate situations where your personal beliefs or preferences conflict with those of the family members that you're engaging with?
So I think that having differing beliefs or ideas about things is pretty common for any group of humans meeting each other. So for me, it's really in these situations where actively listening to the audience, with the intent to understand and even learn, is crucial. Just like it's easy to find differing beliefs in something, I find that it's likely to find commonalities. So, looking at things like what the individual like to do, especially out here in Hawaii, we have a lot of people that enjoy the ocean, that enjoy animals and mountains. So it's very easy to find commonalities, I find. Um, and no matter who you are, or you tend to bring some sort of joy by those things. So I think that's something I definitely do. And also during the dialogue, remaining helpful, informative. My style, if you will, is more of an informative and professional manner. And I think that when you have that type of dialogue with people, ultimately that will begin to build trust and foster relationship where they do want to hear what you have to say and listen to what you're saying.
And how do you go about finding that communality? Is that something that you're doing ahead of time in preparation for the conversation? Does it happen more often during the conversation with the family? Like, how do you manage that whole process?
Yeah, obviously, if there's something prior to the conversation that I can find out from whether it be the healthcare team or just observations, I'm going to kind of focus on that commonality. But generally, that's happening during the conversation. Even every time I have a new employee that I'm training or somebody working with me, I always, focus on the fact that the conversation is not a scripted conversation. We're not going in there, okay, I have to mention this, I have to mention this at this time. I'm building that trust with that conversation. I'm listening to them and hearing what they have to say. And I think that, I wouldn't say 100% every single time you can find commonalities. Sometimes families are not very open or don't not want to speak about, their hobbies or things like that. Just like you were saying before, I think that, situational awareness is very important, and being able to have that conversation and get to those commonalities, if you will, is I guess a little bit more difficult to explain how it's done than it is to within the conversation happen.
Right. Yeah, and this may be a harder follow-up question, and I apologize if it is, but how we're talking about kind of behavioral flexibility, situational flexibility, and so how does the actual identification of communality work its way into the conversation with the family? How do you rely upon that or use that in one way or another to manage that conversation with the family? Is there an example that you can provide, or can you just provide a little bit more information about how, identifying what that is drives the conversation process?
So an example that I can think of with identifying commonalities with people that may have differing lifestyles or whatever has happened prior is actually highlighted in the example that I have in one of the other questions. It was a recent case that I was on, but yeah, I would say generally that just is a natural thing that happens. Like an example that I have is there was a recent case where we had an inmate, and during this, the course of what brought him to where he was, there was a lot of mistrust with the family and with everybody else. So they were not very open to talking about him and his lifestyle. There were some tattoos that were identifiable to a band that I was familiar with. And when I mentioned it, they mentioned how he was in a band and how he, obviously the band that he had tattooed on him was something very important to him. We spoke about that. We spoke about playing that music during the time when he was going to the OR. And that was something that the family did find comfort in. And, I think also a little shocked that I was aware of that band or might have liked their music as well. But it was something that definitely bridged a little bit of uncomfortableness gap for sure.
Yeah. So it almost allows you to relate on a more personal level as part of that conversation because you share that in common.
Correct.
Interesting. Sarah, how about you? How do you navigate these kinds of situations where your beliefs or preferences aren't necessarily aligned with those of the family members?
For me, I go to an example of probably in the past year, we've had 2 donors that were both in transition from male to female, very similar cases. The legal next of kin is the parent, but there was also a significant other and some friends in play. Parents saw the donor as a him, referred to him as him. The significant other referred to the donor as she, and used the female name. Parents used the birth given name. Very different. And my beliefs is, personally, I would prefer to call a donor by what they went by, what they preferred, she. But out of respect for the parents, when speaking with the parents, I used he pronouns, used son, his birth name. And then when speaking with the significant other and the friends, try to use she, and then the name that the donor had wanted to be called by. It gets very confusing and complicated trying to keep it all straight. But I found like I was able to get more respect and trust from the parents and from the significant other and friends by using what they were most comfortable with. And so that's how I navigated that, just so that they both felt comfortable in speaking with me.
And so how did that particular situation end up, or did they all end up seeing things the same way?
She ended up being a donor. The parents and the significant other never were in the same room together for me, and so that was never an issue trying to navigate them at the same time, talking to them separately. And so that was never an issue. And the parents were open to having the significant other there and present for the honor walk because they couldn't be there. And so ultimately they all kind of came together. The parents were open to me letting the significant other know what was going to be donated and keeping that person in the loop as well. And so it all worked out well. It was just in that time period, I really had to focus on make sure who I was talking to and respecting what their beliefs were in the situation.
Yeah, and I imagine at some level that's got to be a little bit effortful to be able to go from one room to another room and completely change how you're managing that conversation with those family members, given that situation. So, I mean, that's got to create some stress for you, I would imagine.
For sure.
Do you find
Yeah.
that?
Just worried in my head constantly. I gotta make sure I say the right pronoun, like in my head. It gets very
Yeah,
confusing and stressful to make sure that you're with whoever you're talking to. Because then you also add in the third fact that hospital, because genetically still male, and our records had to be male, and the hospital records male, and so I'm trying to navigate that also when you're talking to staff members.
yeah. And, this question is really about, having a situation where your personal beliefs are inconsistent with the family members, and you kind of talked about that. That also, I imagine, would be particularly challenging to really push aside your opinions and how you feel about a particular situation and approach it in the way that is most conducive to the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And so how do you have to, is it effortful to hold back your personal opinions and beliefs, and how do you do that? Is that
I mean, for me personally, I think that everyone has a right to their own opinion when it comes to that type of situation. Again, for me, was comfortable, she, her, that's what I felt comfortable saying, but I know that's not what the parents were comfortable with. And, I'm not the one that just lost their child. I'm not the one that's in the grieving process. So what I think shouldn't matter. It's more about what is important to this family in this time, and setting aside my beliefs. It's pretty easy when I'm looking at this family member and they're devastated, and I don't want to cause more harm than they're already going through.
Yeah. Easy for you. There's a lot of people who are challenged to set aside their own opinions and beliefs and to prioritize, the needs of the family or the desires of the family. And so it's commendable that you're able to do that. It seems so fluidly, and that is something that a segment of our population has to learn is how to be able to navigate those situations without letting your personal opinions or values or morals enter the conversation and potentially derail the family experience altogether. So, Sarah, I'm going to start with you on this third question, and that is, and it's kind of similar to the last one. So, if you have a different example, but can you share an example from your experience where you had to adjust your behavior to effectively communicate with different stakeholders? And it sounds like what you just said, but I'm sure that in your experience, you've had other situations where this has been something that you've had to deal with.
Yes. So in my experience, even before I have a conversation with the family, getting the hospital staff on board and getting their buy-in in the conversation makes my conversation with the family go so much better. So I really try to have good conversations with hospital staff up front before I ever even meet with the family. One example is, typically when I'm talking to nurses, it's more of like a clinical coworker situation. There's one particular nurse at one of the hospitals I'm at that she seems to get very attached to her families and her patients. There's nothing wrong with that, but when she gets attached to a family, she almost becomes protective. She thinks she's being protective of a family member by, trying to tell me, oh, don't go talk to them. They're not going to want to donate. You're just causing more harm. And she thinks that she's being protective of this family. And so I have changed my way of talking, my style of talking to her, and I approach her more as a family member herself than a clinical staff member, checking in with her on what her needs are, where she is at emotionally, working on building that trust with her specifically, because then that way I know that she's going to help me have a good conversation with the family member.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. Just all of the conversation to this point has really been how do we dynamically navigate our approach and our interpersonal style to align with the situation related to the family members. But there's this other whole group of people that are, are just part of that experience with the hospital staff. And so in a sense, you almost have to be almost like a social chameleon, in the sense that you've got to be able to change your colors no matter where you're at. And I think maybe having some familiarity with the hospital staff, if that's possible, allows a little bit more predictability in how you might manage those situations. But that's obviously not always the case. So it seems like you've learned how to effectively navigate those interactions with that nurse. And that's kind of separate from the entire family experience as well. That's interesting. Sean, what about you?
Yeah, so for me, my situation was specific to the family, and speaking with the difference between my beliefs but just listening to the conversation, just a little bit of a backstory. So my specific situation, there was an inmate, he was an active inmate, and he passed away while in police custody. It led to a very complex dynamic with the family. Their mistrust of the institutional system, so the police, the prisons, the hospital staff, anybody who was telling them anything about their son. It was really a difficult time for them to be able to listen to and to go along with. And as we all know, the concept of brain death can be very difficult for anybody non-clinical to understand. And this family struggled to accept that diagnosis. Which led to very tense interactions with the hospital staff, with even security having to intervene at certain times. So after learning about this patient, speaking with this family and what had happened to him leading up to his incarceration, I quickly learned that he had a string of unfortunate events that spiraled into ultimately his demise. He was a very good person, a lot of aloha for everyone he came across. And unfortunately, he brought a lot of negative attention to his family name, with news reports and social media and police interrogations, etc., during his final week. So this caused the family to be defensive and accusatory, really just to protect the honor of the person that they knew and loved so much. And to facilitate donation, we really have to be everybody's go-to at the hospital. So not only the nurse, but the doctors, the patient's family, our own colleagues, right? Everybody has a certain job to do. And sometimes, the logistics between what we need done and where the family is at is something that we have to really navigate. And during all these conversations, really, I think that we have a unique opportunity to really educate on what we know. Obviously, unbiased on each side, just like Sarah, I don't think had said, I don't think that it's our job in this role to really go into family conversations with personal beliefs. I mean, I've had family conversations with mothers that were incarcerated for murdering their child who I was approaching them on. Obviously, we know that's not something that what anybody is very comfortable with, or is in line with her or that person's beliefs. However, during that conversation, it's really not about us or anybody else's thoughts. It's not about what the healthcare team is telling us about that family. Obviously, we take this information and we do what we can to manage the conversation with it. However, I think that that's a very a good way to look at a conversation, like what Sarah was saying, as far as not really bringing our thoughts or really to influence a family. But I think that, ultimately, having that conversation with everybody that you can, and learning and, changing the way that you speak to the healthcare team about the person versus how you speak to the family about that person is something that is imperative with this role.
Absolutely. And so what do you consider to be the most challenging aspect of that? When you think about how your approach has kind of changed over time and what you've learned, were there, I know that you said that this kind of comes more naturally to you, but were there things that you had to teach yourself to do, to train yourself to do a little bit more effectively as far as that's concerned over time?
I think, especially being an in-house liaison. You really begin to know these nurses that we work with. You begin to know them on a personal level. The same thing with the doctors. And when they're telling you one thing that needs to be, portrayed to a family, or what the family is doing or how they are, you begin to have that automatic trust with them, and you're on their side or on their team in a sense. But it's a very different space for the family who you're speaking with. So I think just being comfortable with one of the things that I will continue to talk about is genuineness. So, I think it's important to, when you're having conversations with healthcare teams, obviously acknowledge their concerns, but do, kind of reiterate, what our mission is, what we're doing, our role, and being able to not come off as you're lying or fake to anybody. Being 100% and wearing everything on your sleeve is important when it comes to letting them know where we're at in the process. But that was something that I felt, over time, with being in that same hospital all the time, became more difficult, as far as, being one of their quote unquote team members, but then having this whole other mission that we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. So Sarah and Sean, but we'll start with Sarah. I think one of the things that we really want are some takeaways that, these sessions are designed to provide tips or strategies or best practices, just different ways to think about situations or how you approach your job that can, help you to provide better support or to improve authorization rates in different situations. So when we talk about this notion of code switching or behavioral variance in situations, what advice would you give to all of the other people on this call today about, how to do this more effectively in their advocacy work? How do you more effectively adapt to these situations?
I think Sean kind of just touched on this also, but 100% there is no scripted conversation. You have to listen to what the family's needs are and be able to read the room. Yeah, there are certain points that I have in the back of my head that I need to make sure happen. Number one, making sure that the family understands brain death or that death is imminent. I definitely always try to make sure that is known up front. And by doing that, I ask open-ended questions to the family. And so that I find out what their words are, what they're using, what their understanding of what's going on. And then after that, I really just try to let the family guide the conversation. And then pick up on verbal cues, nonverbal cues of, where the conversation needs to go. I think being genuine, just like Sean was saying, being genuine in your conversation when I'm talking about like benefits of what donation can mean to that family, I don't say anything that I 1000% don't believe. I have seen so many families positively affected by donation, and I just am very open and honest about what that looks like. And I feel like being genuine and being honest and open can build so much trust in a family. And so if you're having these almost like scripted conversations, families are going to pick up on that and they're going to know it's not genuine.
Yeah.
My coworker says this, I have to give her credit, Carrie, she taught me, you have all these tools in your tool belt. That doesn't mean you have to use every single one of them. You need to pick what's most appropriate for the situation.
Yeah, and that's exactly the concept, is how do we know what is best or appropriate for that situation? And I hadn't made this connection until recently, but when we look back at some of the research that we did, one of the things that we found was especially high levels of analytical thinking or analysis were associated with lower levels of authorization rates. So if you're a little bit too analytical in how you approach a situation, you are less likely to ultimately achieve authorization. And that's been explained in other ways in different sections about, preparing and kind of overanalyzing notes or whatever the situation may be. But one of the ways that it may manifest itself is this preparation, this kind of scripted approach and thinking, I've got it all, and these are the things that I have to say, rather than listening to what the family is saying, understanding those unique dynamics, and then just responding to those based on the situation. So, there's a parallel there that I think is interesting.
I do. And another point is, you do want to find out from the medical staff about the family and family dynamics. You do want to do that. But take everything they say with a grain of salt, because so many times I've been like, oh, they're going to not like you. They're going to kick you out of the room. They're hateful people. There's no way they're going to donate. And then you get that stuck in your head and you overthink it. And then you're just setting yourself up. And then you walk in there and it's a totally different situation.
Yeah.
So yes, you should learn about the family, but also I try not to overthink it and get too over prepared, because then it becomes an unnatural conversation.
Yeah. Sean, what about you? What advice would you give to other people, as far as thinking about how to do this more effectively, how to try to leverage a little bit more variability in these situations?
I mean, I think educating yourself on different people and cultures and stuff is obviously very important. Being willing to listen and even reconsider what you think you know, and letting the family really maybe even teach you something about life. Another thing I find very valuable that I don't know, I think you touched on it a little bit, Anthony, in the micro training, really is self-awareness, right? So just being able to read a room is very imperative. And I think that that's one of the things that, is kind of like what you were saying earlier, a little difficult to teach. It's something that I believe societally, we need to kind of grow up with knowing how to do and learn from that. Just simply being a good person is not going to help you navigate a conversation with differing audiences. It is important to observe people's reactions to not only what you're saying, but also to what everybody's saying in the family or in the room. Sometimes we might not even be the best person for that particular family, and we may even need to pull in, different approach styles or somebody to assist with that conversation. One thing I always share with people, new people coming into this role, that has always helped me, is that we're not walking in to sell anything. We're not walking in there to try to convince a family to doing something that is against what they believe in. We're simply just having a conversation with a family and offering them another way to honor their loved one, extend their legacy, and offer a unique way to help a family find a light at the end of a tunnel, right? So mirroring, I think that you spoke about a little bit too, is part of that. So being able to, kind of mesh in with the vibe, if you will, of the family, and go off of how they are and what they need, is important. And then just ultimately, I think it's more when you have brand new people coming, but just like what Sarah was saying, a script or something like that is never going to be genuine or authentic. You have to go in with an open mind and an open heart.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I think is particularly challenging about our topic today is that, unlike a lot of skills, if you're trying to learn something, you're usually getting some feedback. You're getting information about whether you're doing something right or wrong. And you're getting advice on how to correct that behavior in real time. And that's not really possible here. You don't really have somebody standing over your shoulder reflecting on how you manage that conversation and how to be a little bit more dynamic or adaptable in that situation. So the learning curve is going to be different because of that, because you're not getting feedback in real time. So I think it's going to be a challenge, but it's definitely something that's achievable. So we've got some time for Q&A, and so if you have questions that you want to present to Sean and Sarah, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. I know we have one right now. We've got another one that I have available, and so I'm going to ask this one now. So how do you navigate a hospital ICU team that may view you as a vulture or only show up waiting for people to die? Many times they try to talk to our OPO out of DCDs for many reasons, resources, feelings, etc. So how do you navigate that perception of you or your role when you kind of walk into that situation? Sarah, we'll start with you.
It does happen. There's some hospital staff, particularly, that, does not love it when they see us come on the unit. And, my thinking is, I think a lot of it is, when we come in there, they don't get to see the other side of it. They don't get to see a lot of the times of the good that comes out of it. And we end up a lot of times just giving them more work to do, is my feelings, is why sometimes they can be so frustrated with us. And so I really just, when I'm on a unit that isn't in full support of DCD or whatever it is, I really listen to what they have to say to me, but also, with a smile on my face, educate them on why we are there and why it is a possibility that they can save 3-4 lives, and that's why we're here. And I've had times where physicians are like, "Oh, well, they're not going to make it. You're not going to have time," and well, you're wasting your time. They're not going to make it to OR. And I've just said, well, we're going to work it until we can't work it anymore. And, this family is adamant that they want to be a donor, and we're going to work it until, there's not a heartbeat anymore. And that particular case, she ended up donating 6 or 7 organs, and was able, to show that physician, look, this is what can happen. We make miracles happen every day. And in this particular case, your patient was able to save 6 lives.
And Sean, what about you? How do you navigate that situation where you might not be viewed very positively?
Yeah. So for me, I don't get offended by the vulture term or anything like that. I those type of things. I think that if we have a reaction, sometimes the person who's delivering that information is looking for that reaction. If they don't get it, it might be something they steer away from next time. But ultimately, I have a secret weapon. So I have a very personal attachment to donation, that I'm familiar with, that I'm comfortable with sharing my story with. I've had my specific situation come up to healthcare teams who had those views before, and they ultimately will almost immediately see that my intent is very different than what they may have thought, right? Donation came to me, and it's something that, it's a very horrific situation in which it came. It kind of does grab people's attention when you tell that. But I think that without that, right, most people don't have that connection. But one of the things that we might not always do as well as we could or should do is that when we have these cases that go that way, or when we have these healthcare teams that may particularly have those sort of old style views, is that bringing the outcomes to them afterwards, right? That we saved 6 lives, bringing that and telling them they saved 6 lives, showing them the positives. A lot of times they're here watching this patient die. We look at attending physicians who, whether we acknowledge it or not, they are not, it's not just okay when they lose a patient. That's something that they pride themselves in being there to prevent from happening. So when we bring back that positive outcomes and how it's supporting the family that they were supporting, I think that the next time and the next time, right, it takes some time to do these type of feedback and follow-ups, but and one of the things I find funny too is what Sarah was talking about, is every time we have a healthcare team and they're like, "Oh my God, this family is furious. It's a nightmare. They're gonna tell you to get out immediately." I, I would say I would put 99% time they say yes to donation. And I don't know if it's just they needed something different, right? Something positive. They were losing control of something that they couldn't control. But I think it's very important to share the successes of each case with these people and thank them for everything that they've done to facilitate that gift.
That's a really great idea. I mean, in terms of giving them some ownership and some really positive outcomes as a way of building some loyalty and credibility from them in the future, I think giving them that ownership is really great. Another question that came in, and Sean, we'll start with you on this one. And I think not only am I interested in the question, but whether whether your approach changes situationally, kind of thematically with what we've been talking about. So when you're meeting with families, at what point in the conversation do you introduce your role with the OPO, or do you open the conversation with that information? So when do you tell the family who you are and why you're there?
Yeah, so that's obviously something that's very different with each situation. Sometimes you walk into a family, they're reading your badge, writing your name down, what exactly you do. Um, Ultimately, I always go back to honesty and genuineness. I'm never going to tell them, oh, I'm just here for, something else that's not true, because either way, you're going to get to that conversation and then it's going to be divulged as to what your intent was. So learning kind of phrases that don't ultimately say exactly what everything is, like don't say I'm here for the organ donation. I'm here from the organ donation place to talk to you about donation, right? That's gonna completely eliminate the ability for you to build up to that conversation. So kind of, I would say for somebody to prepare for that kind of role playing with different situations, with different family styles. I will say I'm a family services coordinator. I'm here, or, ultimately sometimes the healthcare team will say somebody's going to be here to speak with you about next steps. So that is a phrase that is used as well. But if it is some family that says, I need to know exactly what your role is, why you're here, what you're exactly talking about, I'm going to introduce the topic of organ donation a little sooner than another family who maybe I wouldn't. I think one of the things, and never even thinking about it as far as writing it down as a checklist item or anything like that, but my first and foremost thing I do in every single family meeting is I ask them if they, obviously I don't say, do you understand, but I will gain their understanding of the imminent death or brain death. That does open up the ability for open conversation. And a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, I'm able to get that trust building and get to the comfortable place where the topic of organ donation, or the transition into the topic of organ donation, is comfortable for the family.
And what about you, Sarah? What's your approach, and is it relatively consistent, or does it change based on maybe the type of death or the demographics of the family? How do you manage that whole introduction process?
I typically try to wait until we're further along in the conversation. Just like Sean, I always introduce myself. My name is Sarah. I work in family services. We also try to have the nurses or whoever say, someone's going to talk to you about next steps. That's what we prefer. That doesn't always happen. If donation has been brought up by either family or hospital staff, I'm going to immediately tell them who I am. If donation has not been brought up, and they're willing and open to talk about their family member first and start building that trust, that's what I prefer. But I've been in situations where people are like, well, what do you want? And they don't want all that. They don't want all that fluff, and they need somebody to be straightforward and honest and get to the point. Families sometimes need that. And so then I will immediately say who I am and what I'm there to talk to them about. And they appreciate that because I'm able to identify that they need the conversation to happen quicker rather than try to, tiptoe around it.
Yeah. I think we've got time for one more question that I'm just generally curious about. I think one of the counter arguments to this behavioral variability or flexibility and how we manage these conversations is that you are at risk of losing authenticity in how you manage your conversations, or what the perception of the family is, as opposed to going in there and having your approach and kind of following that same cadence each time. So how do you go about changing how you manage conversations based on communalities or other ways of building trust, or finding a tattoo that may give you some tie-in, and it also not appear inauthentic? how do you balance this level of authenticity with personal dynamics? Is that effortful, or does it come with managing each conversation uniquely and having a level of comfort doing that? Sarah, I'll start with you.
I mean, I genuinely want to know about the family. And so when I try to ask them about their loved one or about them and their family situation, I genuinely genuinely want to know about them. I just inherently find family dynamics extremely interesting. And so I love hearing about the person and the family and this person and that person. And so I personally, I don't have advice, I guess, for that, but I do really like to know about the families. And so I feel like it does come off genuine.
Sean, in a minute or less, can you kind of summarize how you think about that?
Yeah, I think that basically what even Sarah was kind of trying to say is I do the same thing. So I'm not going to try to appear genuine. I'm just going to be genuine. I'm not going to pretend to. We'll just use an example, like something like, let's say they had a different band that I didn't like. I'm not going to, even if I know them, I'm not going to pretend that I do, because that's not authentic. So I can see where, so one of the things that I have seen is that, like, trying to elicit that conversation can come off as non-genuine. I think walking into a room and saying, "Oh, can you tell me a little bit about your loved one?" That sounds like a social worker or a psychologist would say in a session. So that's not, ultimately going to be as genuine as it would be getting to there naturally. So walking in, having an open conversation, listening to what they're saying, and letting them really guide that conversation is something that is important. And yeah, just like what Sarah was saying, if you're going in there and you're going in with a script, or if you're going in there and you're going to pretend to be something to relate to them, they will know that that's not authentic, and that's not beneficial. So just like I think what Sarah was saying too, is wanting to know, wanting to hear their story, actually caring is going to be identifiable by a family.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Sarah, for your time today. We really do appreciate it, and all of the good information that you shared. Thank you to all of you who joined the conversation today. We appreciate your interest and your attendance today. As a reminder, we'll be sending out a survey about your experience in this session later this afternoon or tomorrow morning. And one of the important things there is your opportunity to give us ideas on what to cover in the future. So if anything, just take a few minutes. It takes 5 minutes to do that survey, and share your thoughts with us on what you'd like to hear about in the months to come. So again, thank you for your time and attention. We appreciate it, and we will talk with you next time.